It's going to give me great pleasure to introduce our next guest speaker, who's Margaret Thomas. Margaret is a member of the Zonta Club of the Central Coast in New South Wales. And I met Margaret at a District 24 Area 1 workshop in Gosford in March this year. We got talking over dinner and I just had to know her story. She's a senior international development professional, and from 2012 to 21, she worked for the United Nations Development Programme in New York, and most recently as the head of the Effectiveness Group, and formerly as the senior advisor for the Corporate Strategy and Governance Group. Prior to joining the UNDP, she worked for AusAID for over 20 years, and her positions included extensive country office experience, including as head of Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste and country offices, and she had an earlier posting in the Philippines. In Canberra, she served as the head of the Pacific branch and concluded her career with AusAID as first Assistant Director General with a focus on corporate reform issues. And she's currently a board director for Oxfam Australia. So over to you, Margaret. Take it away.
Thanks very much, Carol, and great to join you. I did participate in the last think tank meeting back in April, I think it was. So, I'm really delighted that our club decided to set up an advocacy subcommittee on gender equal climate action this week, following the talk with Carol and some other work we've done. So we're moving ahead and joining the locomotion that Carol has set in action. I'm sorry, I just have a few slides. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, is that coming through, Carol? Thumbs up? Yep. Okay. So what I thought I'd do, because I did work for UNDP, I was based in New York for 12 years, and I thought I would talk a little bit about the UN and the United Nations Development Programme. I think Zonta is very familiar with organisations like UN Women and UNICEF, but UNDP is a big player as well in the climate change and gender space. And I thought maybe just to put a little bit of that in context and to think about how it aligns with Zonta's work might be interesting. So I'm aiming to be quick, hopefully 10 to 12 minutes. But when I was thinking about just what to say yesterday, I heard the Secretary General speak in very robust terms about where we're tracking on our commitments against the Paris Agreement. And he said, I see a lack of ambition, a lack of trust, a lack of support, a lack of cooperation, and an abundance of problems around clarity and credibility. Countries are far off track in meeting climate change promises and commitments. The climate agenda is being undermined. At a time when we should be accelerating action, there is backtracking. At a time when we should be filling gaps, those gaps are growing. So, I thought that was very powerful coming from Antonio Guterres, and, a real wake-up call for us and what we need to do. And I think this was in the context of a preparatory meeting for COP, the next COP meeting coming up, heaven help us, in the United Arab Emirates, who are major fossil fuel gas producers, etc. But anyway, moving on. I thought I'd just start with a little mud map of the United Nations. The UN is very complicated and it's not very transparent for people who aren't familiar with it, but it's a huge player obviously on the global stage. So just very quickly, there's the General Assembly, very powerful, one country equals one vote. That's, if you're Vanuatu or whether you're the Russian Federation, every country has its say there. The Security Council, which I think, again, people are familiar with, it has the big five permanent members, Russia, China, UK, USA, France, and then another 15 members in all, so another 10 members elected. Australia's been on the Security Council 5 times, most recently in 2013, 2014. So we try and get on it about every 10 to 15 years, I say, would be our turn. There's the Economic and Social Council. This is where issues around the economic and social work of the UN get debated and coordinated. And then the face of the UN Secretary General and the Secretariat, really the public service that supports the UN, they're subsidiary to all these other organs, basically, who make decisions, and the Secretariat and the UN Secretary, they have a voice, right, but they don't make the policies and make the decisions. And then there's all these funds and programs and specialised agencies. There are more than 30 of those. So it's no wonder not many of them are very well known. But you can see, obviously, in my map, UNDP sits in the middle of this. But you'll see there are others you're familiar with: UN Women, UNICEF, we've mentioned the UN Environment Programme. The World Bank Group is part of the UN family as well. Etc. So that's not all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it just gives a flavour of the extent of work that the UN has, and the funds and programs and the specialised agencies. I would say, though, even though it looks like there's way too many, the big move is on for collaboration. You can't work on your own. You need to work with your sister agencies, and I think there's a lot more of that. Anyway, so just a little bit about UNDP. It's a very big organisation. It has a budget of around $5 billion. It works in 170 countries, and it employs around 20,000 people to work for it. While it works in 170 countries, it physically has a country presence, a country office in about 135 of those. And UNDP is really a trusted partner of many, many governments. They see UNDP as an honest broker and someone who'll come in and help them with their development work. And everything UNDP does is agreed with partner governments. And while you might think that's a constraint, it certainly doesn't stop UNDP working with a whole range of civil society actors, and also taking on quite difficult issues that sometimes governments want to partner with in a way that will help them take action. So I think the big three things that UNDP is trying to drive, I think resonate very well with the climate agenda and many of the things that we've been talking about. So, firstly, green, inclusive and digital transformations, really helping countries to be able to deliver on development for their people, but in a sustainable way. Linked very strongly with Zonta's human rights-based approach, really focused on leaving no one behind as we move towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And thinking about human agency, empowerment, inclusion and equity, and gender equity is a big part of that. And then finally, building resilience, so that really helping countries to strengthen, mitigate and respond to what is an increasing number of conflicts, disasters, and the climate change and social disruption and all the sorts of things that are going on in the world at an increasing rate. Just a little bit more on what UNDP does, moving beyond that level. We're now nearly, we're more than halfway towards the 2030 deadline for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And you can see the areas that UNDP really focuses on in its programmatic work. They're completely aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. So I don't think maybe some of these would be surprising, I'm not sure, but clearly a strong focus on poverty, a strong focus on governance. Without good governance, countries really can't develop. That includes things like elections, digital transformations, and again, addressing the issue of shrinking civic space in many countries. Resilience, as we just talked about a minute ago, really responding to shocks and crises, whether that's conflict or disaster or climate change. And they then linked to that, putting nature at the heart of economic transformations that are going underway, so that what is coming out of that is green-based economies, not just growth at any cost. Energy access is somewhat of a newer area, but recognising that energy access and access to renewable energy is absolutely critical. And then gender equality is absolutely front and centre of everything UNDP does. And it is mainstream throughout all the programs, but it also is a standalone area of investment. And, you know, a lot of that is about women's economic empowerment. It's also about addressing social norms, certainly addressing gender-based violence, and, you know, a whole range of other areas. And we certainly work very closely with UN Women in that area. But I just wanted to very quickly perhaps share some of UNDP's work, just to give a flavour of what they do. So I think one of the biggest things UNDP does is support countries with their nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. These are the non-binding contributions that every country has signed up to. And you might remember the Albanese government increased Australia's nationally determined contributions shortly after they were elected, so that we have a new goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030. But UNDP partners with you know, many countries in the world, 127 of them, to help them develop their own nationally determined contributions. And following COP27 in Scotland 2 years or so ago, nearly over 100 of the countries increased the level of their ambition as well. So I think that's just a huge contribution, which you don't see. It's sitting behind the scenes because countries own it themselves, as they should, but UNDP contributes to that. And they're also helping turn those into action now to implement them. Aligning finance with environmental goals in country budgets, and also attracting private sector investment. That's a big area that UNDP supports. Access to clean, affordable and sustainable energy. This is becoming a major area of investment. It's starting small, as I said, from over 4 years, from 2018 to 2021, about 14 million people were supported in 33 countries to gain access to energy. But UNDP's just started a massive program in Africa, rolling out solar mini grids, which actually aims to reach 396 million people, which would be more than 2/3 of the population in Africa that currently don't have access to electricity. I mean, that would be transformative, not just for climate change, but also for people's lives and capacity for development. So solar, again, green productive use of financing and those sorts of things. And also recognising nature. So there's a very big funding pledge around nature, particularly recognising Indigenous biodiversity issues and how that can be recognised and increased to overcome the massive extinction of species and plants that we're dealing with. And again, financing and also increasingly working with the private sector on greening supply chains and production lines. So it's a kind of a very diverse portfolio. This whole portfolio adds up to around $3.2 billion. So it's a really significant investment in nature and climate and energy. And clearly it's not just about those areas, right? There's spillover effects into poverty, gender equality, and all those related issues. And I just really wanted to finish on recognising that that gender equal climate action, which is Zonta's, you know, really promoting through its own international policy. This is very much aligned with what UNDP is doing as well. So I don't think any of these areas would surprise you. Energy access for women's economic empowerment, as Carol's been leading on gender responsive disaster risk reduction and management, economic recovery, natural resource management, and implementing the gender equality commitments in climate action plans. So I think one of the great things, and these are just some little country examples sitting around that pink box that kind of just give a bit of a flavour about what's going on. But having 100 countries integrate gender equality into their nationally determined contributions plan, I mean, that's fantastic. That wasn't there in the first generation of plans that came out, you know, after the adoption of the Paris Agreement. You know, things like Bhutan training gender focal points with different ministries, or really helping to coordinate and implement gender equality and climate initiatives. Having renewable energy funds that target entrepreneurship opportunities for women, and you know, having disaster recovery plans informed by sex disaggregated data and gender analysis. I mean, they're just a handful of examples really about some of the work that's going on. So I think that's really all I wanted to say. A very quick canter through the world of UNDP. But I think, you know, I hope in time that UNDP and Zonta might be able to join forces at some point through some of the international projects. And, you know, I think we've got a great opportunity coming up if Australia is successful in its bid to host the Conference of Parties on the Paris Agreement in 2026, which it's put its hand up to do. That would be a really exciting opportunity for us here, Zonta International, but Zonta in Australia as well, and our focus on gender, and looking out to our Pacific Island partners as well and friends to think just, you know, what do we want to do around that? It's not that far away, and if we're successful, I think it's an opportunity we'd like to take advantage of. So thank you, Carol and everyone, and that's it from me.
Thank you, Margaret. That's really good. You've given us a really good framework of how UNDP works, because it's so huge. You go into the websites and you just get lost. So you've really helped us to sort of work your way through the confusion, which is great. And now we know you're there. We know who to ask when we need things, which is great. So this has been the introduction to Margaret, which is wonderful. Does anyone have any questions?
Comment?
Yeah.
So Margaret, just be interested. I did some teaching in East Timor, and one of the people I ended up working with for a while on a project actually had been a gender officer at UNDP in East Timor, and sometimes we forget that, you know, there's pretty good he's in this world too. And he has taken his kind of learning from having worked for UNDP, and he's sort of started up community centres which have a focus on providing women with opportunities and things like that. So he's a kind of he's a man, but he's made really good use of his UNDP training and really putting it to good use for women still and people in his community.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Suzanne.